What are we covering in the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War? Day 135. As more medicines with the names of hostages were found in Khan Yunis' Nasser hospital, it has become apparent today that this was likely part of an unreported overture by the EU at the beginning of the war to deliver these medicines to the hostages. The al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is a group that used to be affiliated with Fatah and is much smaller in the Gaza Strip, reported firing mortars at IDF soldiers today in the al-Burstein refugee camp. Washington Post published a report today that Iran has grown concerned about escalations and a regional war, and has urged its militias, including Hezbollah, to utilize restraint in their attacks. Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted the demand of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir to limit the access of Arab Israeli citizens to the al-Aqsa Mosque during the month of Ramadan. Reportedly, this was done against the positions of the Israeli Shabak and its security establishment in Israel. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of February 18th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 19th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, as more medicines with the names of hostages were found in Khan Yunis' Nasser hospital, it has become apparent today that this was likely part of an unreported overture by the EU at the beginning of the war to deliver these medicines to the hostages. Today it was published that more medicines with names and pictures of the hostages were found in the Nasser hospital pharmacy. The packets of medicines were sealed and unused. They included hostages who were released in November prior to the medical deal in the middle of January. After the IDF started to report that it is very likely that this is not medicines that were part of the medical deal, EU sources were quoted in the Haaretz news site today, stating that they facilitated delivering medicines destined to the hostages at the beginning of the war. This was unreported but coordinated with Israel. According to the IDF findings in Nasser hospitals, those medicines never reached the hostages. Other news related to the hostage situation, a Persian news site, Bathkuit al-Halij, reported today that after President Herzog met with the Qatari Prime Minister in the last several days in the Munich conference, he consulted with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Israel has decided to send a delegate to Qatar, headed by the head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, in order to continue negotiations about the Paris framework as well as about a complete ceasefire. This was denied by different sources in Israel. There is no report that the head of the Mossad has actually left for Qatar. However, I will add that there are different reports that low-level negotiations are still going on back channels in order to actually bring the sides just back to the negotiating table. Other news, Gal Hirsch, who is appointed by Prime Minister Netanyahu to be in charge of the hostage situation, stated in a CNN interview today that Israel wants a hostage deal and knows that there's a price to pay, but that Hamas's demands are completely ludicrous. He added that the price Israel will pay will not be the end of the war, in addition stating that Rafah must be the next IDF target, since there are lots of hostages and terror organizations there. Now, it's important to note that while Gal Hirsch is the official government appointee for the hostage situation, he in fact has absolutely nothing to do with the hostage negotiations. He has never been to any of the hostage negotiations meetings, nor has he taken part in the actual negotiations within Israel. He is seemingly a political appointee, and the statements that he makes do echo what Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements have been regarding the hostage deal and the future operations into the town of Rafah. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars sent from the Gaza Strip targeting areas of Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in Gaza City, fire was reportedly opened upon Palestinians who were rushing to try to get to an aid truck in the area of Gaza City. There were no reports about how many Palestinians were injured or killed, or if this fire was deliberate fire from the IDF or as part of ongoing confrontations within Gaza City. In addition to this, the al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is an outfit that used to be affiliated with Fatah and since then is more of an independent terror group within the Gaza Strip and parts of the West Bank, reported targeting a gathering of IDF soldiers and vehicles in the eastern parts of the northern Gaza Strip with a rocket. This is a very rare report. The al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade is relatively small within the Gaza Strip. However, it is very possible that they are starting to resurface as there is this power vacuum in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip as well as in the central areas after the IDF has ousted Hamas from these areas. Related to this, the al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade also reported in their Telegram channel that in the central parts of the Gaza Strip in the al-Burstein refugee camp, they fired mortars against IDF soldiers. They reported several IDF soldiers were injured and some were killed. However, this was not confirmed by the IDF. Moving on to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, where the bulk of the fighting is still in Khan Yunis, the operation that the IDF is carrying out in the Nasser hospital is still continuing. The IDF reported today substantial gun battles around the compound of the hospital and dozens of Hamas operatives killed. The IDF also stated that over 200 Hamas operatives within the hospital compound were arrested. Some of them were reportedly masquerading as medical staff. In addition, a car that was stolen from the Nir Oz area during October 7th was also located within the hospital compound, and substantial weaponry was also discovered. In addition, there was intensive fighting reported in other areas of Khan Yunis throughout the day. According to different reports, there were very active IDF tank units in the area that carried out a lot of different operations. A military compound of Hamas was reportedly taken over, uncovering a lot of weapons caches. In Rafah, there was a report that the Israeli Navy fired upon fishing boats that were on the coast of Rafah. It was unconfirmed if anyone was injured or killed in this particular attack. Other news related to the Gaza Strip: Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant stated today that Hamas's Khan Yunis Division, which was made up of 4 different battalions, has been defeated and is no longer functioning as a military outfit. If this is true, this means that Hamas has 6 active battalions that remain active in the Gaza Strip. These are in Rafah and in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, in Deir el-Balah and the associated refugee camps of al-Nusrat and al-Burej. These are the areas that the IDF has not actually invaded since the war began. In addition, Defense Minister Gallant repeated the Israeli line that Yahya Sinwar seems to be losing control of the Hamas movement in the Gaza Strip. He added today that Sinwar has lost contact with the external leadership, and the external leadership of Hamas is in fact looking to appoint a replacement for Sinwar in the Gaza Strip. Hours after he stated this, Muhammad Nazal, who's a member of Hamas's political bureau, responded, stating that Yahya Sinwar is fulfilling his role and is still the leader of Hamas in Gaza. Other news: Minister Gantz in Israel related today to the hostage negotiations and stated that if by the beginning of Ramadan the hostages are not returned, the fighting will expand to Rafah. So this tells us several things. First of all, he's giving a timeline. Ramadan is due to start around March 10th, and he's stating that the negotiations may continue until then. This may also be related to reports that came out in Qatar that Hamas would like to time the hostage agreement to begin on Ramadan. In turn, this is also somewhat of a challenge to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who wanted the invasion of Rafah to commence already and to be done by the end of Ramadan. So we learn all this from what Minister Gantz is saying. Regarding casualties, 1 IDF soldier is reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 236. 5 IDF soldiers reported injured in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 1,373. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that 127 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 28,985. 68,883 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and there are still several thousand Palestinians that are buried under the rubble. Many of them are presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. A Gazan reporter today published a video showing Gazans trying to raid an aid truck that made it to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The UN has been repeatedly stating that it has become almost impossible to deliver aid to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, citing that there's severe hunger and almost famine in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. According to the UN, over 50% of the aid missions that were supposed to deliver food and water to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip have been unable to complete their missions due to different restrictions, and many others were unable to complete their missions due to the security situation. According to local sources, this is the first aid truck to get to this region in a very long time. Other news: the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reported that another patient in the Nasser hospital died after his oxygen machine failed due to the generators in the hospital collapsing as a result of lack of fuel. A total of 8 patients are reported to have died in the hospital as a result of the generators failing. The UN officials in the area today stated that the hospital is no longer functional as a medical institution. There were no reports regarding how many aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Again, what I check is the UN websites, IDF websites, as well as reports from the Palestinian Red Crescent and the Palestinian Border Control. Since the protests in Israel of the Tzav 9 organization began against the different trucks entering in the Kerem Shalom and in the Nitzana crossing, there have been very sporadic reports about how many trucks managed to enter. I will add, this does not mean that trucks do not manage to cross over. It may be that there's some tacit agreement between the different parties to not report how many trucks do manage to enter. When reports do come out, they cite that this is the same numbers that have come in the last several days. However, the regular reports regarding how many trucks manage to enter each day have become very sporadic. Moving on to the West Bank, there was an Israeli settler attack in the Tur Musaya area in the last 24 hours. Local residents reported the settlers raided the village and that several cars were torched. Graffiti was found throughout the area calling for death to Arabs and calling for revenge. Regarding IDF activity in the last 24 hours, the Shihab News Network reported substantial security force activity in the Shuafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem. According to reports, the entrance checkpoint to the camp was closed and confrontations erupted as Israeli police entered the refugee camp. This is the refugee camp from which an attacker left in order to carry an attack in Israel several days ago. According to reports, security forces entered the area, mapped out the attacker's home, as it is likely to either be demolished or sealed up. Regarding other activity in the West Bank, in the entrance to Nablus, a 26-year-old Palestinian reportedly exited his car next to the IDF checkpoint at the entrance to the city. According to reports, he did not adhere to the IDF soldiers' warnings or their calls to stop and was eventually shot and killed. Local sources stated this was Anas Dawikat and that he is part of the Palestinian Authority security forces. In addition, there was a substantial IDF operation that was reported in the Nur Shams refugee camp near Tulkarem. Major engineering units were seized in the region. According to reports, Ahmed Awoufi, who is a senior who was involved in terrorist activity within the refugee camp, was killed, and 4 more Palestinians were arrested. Another Palestinian was reported killed in the confrontations, 2 Palestinians were reported injured, and 1 IDF soldier was reported badly injured as well. In addition, there was other IDF activity reported in Ramallah, where a senior Hamas activist was arrested, as well as in the Balata refugee camp near Nablus, in which 2 Palestinians were arrested. Other IDF activity was also reported in the areas of Kabatia near Jenin, as well as in several areas of Hebron and several villages near Kilkilia. Other news related to the West Bank, amidst the report in the Wall Street Journal that was published today that the Palestinian Authority is on the verge of bankruptcy and will run out of funds already at the end of February, Norway announced today the completion of negotiations regarding the Palestinian Authority tax money. This money is going to be transferred from Israel to Norway in full, and only the portion that is destined for the West Bank is going to be transferred from Norway to the Palestinian Authority. The rest is going to be held in custody in Norway. It's important to note that this tax money that is collected by Israel and prior to the war used to be transferred to the Palestinian Authority every month, constitutes 65% of the Palestinian Authority's budget. Without this transfer that has been frozen since October 7th, the Palestinian Authority is unable to pay the salaries of its different security establishments. According to reports, they are going bankrupt and the Palestinian Authority is starting to lose control in the area. The United States has been pressuring Israel to find a way to transfer the money over to the Palestinian Authority. Israel has been refusing, saying that the money will get to the Gaza Strip. Now Norway has managed to conclude these negotiations, and that may happen in the coming days. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there's continuous relative calm in comparison to the escalations of the middle of last week. A series of anti-tank missiles were sent from Lebanon towards the northern parts of Israel, the areas of Shtula and Kibbutz Yarun. There were direct hits in some houses in both of those attacks. There was also rockets sent towards the areas of Yiftach and Menara. Hezbollah claimed 9 different launches and border incidents throughout the day, including attacks against IDF soldiers in the areas of Evne Menachem and Hardov. Regarding IDF activity, the IDF reported that artillery fire was sent towards different launching sites, as well as towards 2 suspicious border activities in the Al-Masha'ab area as well as Adaharia. There were also 2 rounds of airstrikes that were reported in the Yarun village, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure in the last 24 hours. Amidst this relative calm in the last several days, Washington Post published a report today that Iran is growing concerned about escalations and a regional war, and has urged its militias, including Hezbollah, to utilize restraint in their attacks. The report quotes Hezbollah officials as stating that Iran believes that the different militias in the region have had great achievements and does not want to risk those achievements, adding that Netanyahu is currently cornered and is in a bind, and that a war with Hezbollah will turn his fortunes around, and Iran wants to deny him this. This may be associated with the travels of Iranian foreign minister that was reported last week. He reportedly traveled both to Lebanon as well as then to Syria and Iraq and Qatar, in which he met with the heads of the different militias. The report in the Wall Street Journal adds that the militias in Iraq and Syria have not attacked the United States forces in the last 13 days, and this is almost a record since the war began. Moving on to some of the regional developments in the last 24 hours, after local Yemeni sites reported the coalition carried out several attacks yesterday, today the U.S. Central Command reported that 5 attacks were carried out against 3 nautical cruise missiles of the Houthis, as well as against an uncrewed ship and an underwater vessel. This is the first time the coalition has reported that it attacked an underwater vessel of the Houthis. It was not reported if this vessel was actually operational or not. In addition, the U.S. reported that the coalition intercepted 5 different launches that were carried out from Houthi territory. Later in the day, UKMTO reported that a British cargo ship was attacked off the coast of Moha and that the crew had abandoned ship. According to UKMTO, coalition forces were at the scene and the ship is not in danger, however it has been abandoned by the crew. Moving on to some of the political and general trends of the last 24 hours, there was a meeting that was held today in the Israeli government regarding the upcoming month of Ramadan. In that meeting, Israel's Minister of National Security and head of the Jewish Power Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir, demanded that restrictions that are imposed usually on the entrance of Palestinians into the al-Aqsa Mosque in the Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif also be imposed upon the Arab citizens of Israel. His position was reportedly in sharp contrast to the recommendations of the Israeli Shabak and security forces, who stated this will create a rift with Sunni countries such as Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, all of who are essential to the ongoing negotiations, and they also added that these restrictions are a security concern unto themselves rather than addressing security concerns, and may ignite violence in Israel and the West Bank. Despite this, Ben-Gvir's position was accepted by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and such restrictions, which are still being negotiated, are going to be imposed as we come closer to the month of Ramadan, which is due to begin around March 10th. Relating to this meeting, senior officials who took part in the government meeting say that Netanyahu appears to not understand the magnitude of this decision, adding that Itamar Ben-Gvir was demanding things in order to ignite the region itself. It was later reported that Ben-Gvir asked that the police receive permission to burst into the al-Aqsa compound if a Hamas or Palestinian flag is even waved during Ramadan, however that his request was rejected. Responding to all this, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office stated that the Prime Minister came to a balanced decision to allow freedom of worship on the one hand, while taking into consideration all the security concerns on the other. His message did not relate to the fact that the security forces explicitly recommended that he do the opposite. Other political news relating to the invitation that was issued by Russia to different Palestinian factions to come to Russia for negotiations, Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammad Ashtiya stated today, and I quote, "We are prepared to negotiate with Hamas, but Hamas may not be prepared. Hamas is an indispensable part of the Palestinian arena, and we need to be united in our political agenda." Importantly, while Mohammad Ashtiya is saying, "We are prepared to negotiate," it is unclear if he's speaking as a member of Fatah, as a member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or as a member of the Palestinian Authority. Somewhat contradicting his position regarding the fact that Hamas is an indispensable part of the Palestinian arena, Egyptian Foreign Minister Samah Shukayri was asked today in a press conference about Hamas's role in the future, and he stated that Hamas is outside of Palestinian consensus, which recognizes Israel, and that Hamas has refused to give up violence. He added that someone will eventually need to answer for how Hamas was strengthened in Gaza, and why it was funded in order to increase the polarization within the Palestinian population, and increase polarization between Hamas and peaceful Palestinian streams. So what he is implying is very likely the deal between Qatar and the Israeli government, dating back to the Prime Minister Netanyahu's previous governments in 2017, where the Israeli government allowed Qatar to fund Hamas as a way to make sure that the divide within the Palestinian leadership remains. Egypt is saying someone will have to eventually answer for how Hamas was strengthened in order to further the polarization within the Palestinian leadership. Other political news, the United States announced today that it will veto a UN Security Council resolution on Tuesday calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, adding that this resolution runs counter to the U.S. attempts to develop a hostage deal that will include at least a 6-week truce between the sides in the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke today at a conference of Jewish American leaders in Jerusalem. During his speech, he repeated the phrase "achieving complete victory" over 5 times, adding that this constitutes destroying Hamas, returning the hostages, and ensuring that Gaza is no longer a threat to Israel. He stated that for a hostage deal to happen, Qatar needs to be pressured, since they are the ones who can pressure Hamas, adding, and I quote, "Deal or no deal, we need to finish the job, which means, once again, complete victory." Regarding the future of Gaza and the disagreements with the United States, Netanyahu stated, and again I quote, "I hope that we can come to an agreement about the day after. However, one thing has to be clear. The day after means the day after Hamas is destroyed and is removed from the scene." He added, "Israel cannot agree to international dictation that unilaterally recognizes a Palestinian state, in essence imposing a Palestinian state on Israel after the October 7th massacre." Somewhat relating to this, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, also spoke at the conference. He stated, and I quote, "Our policy is that there should be an over-the-horizon process that Israel should be a part of, making a decision. Now there is a moment in time where there is a real possibility that by engaging in normalization negotiations with Saudi Arabia and engaging in a process of working to reform, revamp, and revitalize the Palestinian Authority, there can be a demilitarized Palestinian state that could live side by side to Israel in peace, but Israel will have to make that choice." Responding to the leaked intentions of the United States to possibly unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, Earlier in the day, the Israeli government unanimously approved of the declarative statement initiated by Prime Minister Netanyahu. That statement reads, and I quote, "Israel categorically rejects international dictations regarding the permanent resolution with the Palestinians. Such a resolution will only be achieved in direct negotiations between the sides, without preconditions. Israel will continue to oppose unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state." What we are seeing is that the United States is still trying to work on its regional deal. The U.S. ambassador to Israel is saying there is a moment in history now where Israel could have a win-win-win situation of being recognized by Saudi Arabia, having normalization talks with other Arab states, as well as having a demilitarized Palestinian state. However, in turn, Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that any such recognition of a Palestinian state will be a reward for the massacres that occurred on October 7th, and that Israel categorically rejects this and is going to achieve ultimate victory. However, in everything that Netanyahu is saying, there is still no actual plan for what is going to happen in the Gaza Strip in the future. If you enjoy these reports, please do remember to give a like, subscribe. If you want to know when reports come out, turn on notifications. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. That is the report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.